Sean, sometimes when I pour my beer, even with a little picnic tap, I get a lot of foam on my beer. And I don't want to throw the foam away. I know it's beer that's hiding in that foam. So where do I start?
So the first thing, number one, Henrik, is to make sure that your beer is cold. So if you have a beer like a lager that's designed to be drunk at 3 or 4 degrees, beer should sit at 1 or 2 degrees because it will lose some temperature through the pour, so it needs to be nice and cold. If you have an ale that's designed to be drunk at a higher temperature, then you don't want to be carbonating that beer as heavily in the first place. When you drink an ale, it tends to be a little softer than a fizzy lager.
The job of the gas, the CO2 in the first place, was not to put gas in my beer in this particular case. All it needs to do is push it out, doesn't it?
Correct. So you've actually carbonated your beer through the brewing process. And if you carbonate to the style that you like, which could be quite fizzy or quite flat, then your beer is at that level and it's ready to be drunk.
The last thing you want to do is introduce more gas when you actually decided that your CO2 level is fine in your ale when you start serving it. So my choices are, when I have this problem of too foamy beer, what do I do then?
So the first thing is to make sure that the lines through which the beer is pouring are cold. They need to be, if it's sitting inside a kegerator, they need to be in the font with the fan on, with the font fan, which is the plastic tube, up into the font, so that when you're touching the font, it's nice and chilled. If that font isn't chilled, you've got warm lines, and your beer goes from cold state to warm state, and what happens to beer in a warm state is the CO2 escapes the beer and you get foam.
And that's why the first beer I usually pour through my kegerator, I almost have to wait 3, 4, 5 times as long because it's lots of foamy in it.
Yeah, quite possibly. If you're using one of our picnic taps, then this needs to live inside the fridge. I know it sounds quite obvious, but if you're moving between different kegs and you're using the picnic tap and this thing's sitting outside, it'll stay nice and warm. So keep this in the fridge alongside your beer.
So the next question I have is, how do I manage the actual CO2 pressure in my vessel now?
So you are now using this gas bottle simply to push gas into the beer to create the pressure to push the beer out.
So at what pressure do I run it then?
So here's the thing, if you have a beer that you are happy with the level of carbonation, you really don't need a lot of gas to push this through. So when we brew, we talk about brewing at 1.5 bar or about 25 psi. We talk about clarifying our beer at 1.1 bar. You can push your beer through at whatever works for you. So it's a trade-off between speed and bubbles, basically. But you could dial this back all the way down to 0.2 of a bar and start pushing the beer through. Because your beer is cold, it will stay carbonated. Okay? If you left it 6 months, sure, it would lose some carbonation, but I don't know anyone that's done that yet. So start at 0.2 and pour your beer. It'll be slow, no bubbles. Bring it up, 0.3, 0.4, you'll find a trade-off where you go, I'm getting a good pour, I'm not getting any foam, and I'm getting it at a rate that I'm happy with.
So my foam level is going to go down, but you made me a happy man now because it means my gas is going to last longer and I can use a lot more brews through my kegerator or through my picnic tap without having to use an awful lot of CO2 gas.
Yep, absolutely.